Saturday evenings were usually my time to decompress. After juggling supplier calls, new recipe testing, and managing staff at 3 different bakery locations, I looked forward to a quiet house. On this particular Saturday, I got home earlier than planned. The meeting with the investor wrapped up ahead of schedule. He was impressed with the concept of the mobile bread truck I pitched and practically begged to fast-track funding. A win like that should have felt incredible. But as soon as I stepped into the house, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. Our 2 kids, Ava and Nolan, were spending the weekend at their grandmother's, which usually meant Casey and I had the place to ourselves. Maybe dinner, maybe a glass of wine, maybe just the luxury of silence. But this silence felt different. Heavy. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and called out, "Casey!" No answer. I headed upstairs, my steps unusually cautious. Maybe it was intuition, maybe just the weirdness of the silence, but I remember my pulse picking up slightly. Our bedroom door was cracked open, the soft glow of a lamp spilling into the hallway. I pushed the door open gently and froze. Casey was in the room, clearly not expecting me home so soon. She jolted when she saw me, eyes wide for a split second before quickly softening into what I can only describe as a performance. Her right hand flew behind her back, concealing something. I stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the room. There was a shirt, a man's shirt, crisp white, faint blue pinstripes, not mine. She had just swiped it off the bed. I noticed one of the wine glasses on the dresser still had condensation, the other half full. I glanced at the nightstand. Sitting there was a sleek, matte black cologne box. Empty. It wasn't one I recognized. "Hey," she said, a bit too brightly. "You're back early." I nodded. Meeting ended early. Investor loved the bread truck idea. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's great, babe." I pointed my chin toward the nightstand. "New cologne." Her gaze followed mine. "Oh, that?" She chuckled. "Yeah, no, that's from the shoot we did for the agency. Remember I told you we were doing those lifestyle mock-ups for the Father's Day campaign? One of the male models must have left his stuff. I meant to toss it in the studio box." Her explanation was smooth, rehearsed. She even picked up the cologne box and inspected it like she was seeing it for the first time. "Looks expensive, huh?" I nodded again, biting back the questions rising in my throat. "Yeah, real fancy." She walked over to me and kissed my cheek. Too quickly. "I was just cleaning up." "You hungry?" "Not really," I said. I was too distracted by the unmistakable scent of cologne lingering in the air. Not one I'd ever worn, and definitely not something Casey ever bought for me. It was one of those sharp, musky ones, strong enough that it had soaked into the linens. I glanced again at the 2 wine glasses. One had red lipstick, the other didn't, but Casey was already heading downstairs, pretending everything was fine. I followed slowly, still in a daze. I didn't mention the shirt. I didn't ask why the sheets were slightly wrinkled, like someone had sat or laid on them recently. I didn't ask about the second wine glass or the way her cheeks flushed a bit when I walked in. She handed me a beer, acting like everything was normal, like we were just winding down from the week. I let her talk about the upcoming campaign, about how annoying her boss had been, about how she'd been meaning to take a weekend off soon. I nodded in all the right places, but inside I was somewhere else. Couldn't shake it. Something in me had shifted the moment I stepped into that room. Not a full collapse, not yet, but a quiet, slow fracture, the kind you don't see until the wall falls apart weeks later. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the faint sound of her breathing next to me. She slept peacefully, or at least pretended to. I stared at the ceiling, that damn cologne smell still in my nose, wondering if I'd ever look at her the same way again. And deep down, I already knew the answer. The next morning, I made pancakes for myself and barely touched them. Casey had already left for what she called a strategy brunch with her creative team. It wasn't unusual. She worked in marketing, and her agency loved any excuse to schedule meetings over avocado toast. But her seat at the table across from me felt unusually empty. Not just physically, it was like her presence had been missing for a while now, and I had only just noticed. After cleaning up, I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through nothing on my phone. Social media, emails, the weather. Anything to distract me from the knot tightening in my stomach. But it wasn't working. The image of the wine glasses, that shirt, and the cologne box played on a loop in my head. And once the loop started, I couldn't stop it. I started replaying the last few months, piecing things together like a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. It was subtle at first, how Casey suddenly started working late multiple times a week, claiming there were endless planning sessions, urgent projects, or last-minute client crises. At first, I didn't question it. Her job was high pressure, and I respected that. But then it became a pattern. She'd leave before the kids were even out of bed some mornings and come home long after they were asleep. When I'd ask how things were going, she'd brush me off. Same old grind, she'd say. And when I offered to bring dinner to her office or drop by with pastries, she'd shoot me down with something like, "Oh, we're bouncing around between client sites, not worth the hassle." I started remembering more odd moments. Like the time she came home dressed up, heels, blazer, and a fitted black dress, and claimed they had a spontaneous presentation for a potential client. "We had to impress them," she said with a smirk. "You wouldn't believe how shallow some of these execs are." At the time, I didn't overthink it. But now? Now, I wondered who she was trying to impress. Her wardrobe had changed, too. She'd always had great taste, but lately her outfits leaned more seductive than strategic. Low-cut blouses. Heels she never used to wear to work. Brand-name perfume she'd never bought before. I even caught her doing her makeup in the car mirror one morning while parked in our driveway, something she used to rush through at the kitchen table while sipping coffee and helping Nolan pack his backpack. Then there were the mood swings. She'd come home exhausted, tense, like she'd been carrying the weight of 10 people. She was quicker to snap, sometimes over nothing. One night, Nolan accidentally spilled apple juice on her phone charger and she lost it, yelling loud enough to make him cry. Afterward, she apologized profusely and blamed it on work stress. But I noticed how her patience had worn thin, not just with the kids but with me too. I was either in the way or not enough. There was no in between. I tried to think of the last time we really connected. Not just talked about schedules or bills or Nolan's dentist appointment. I mean really connected. I couldn't remember. The last date night we had ended early because she got a client call. She took it outside and didn't come back to the table for nearly 20 minutes. When I asked who it was, she said nobody. Just work. And then there was her phone. She used to leave it lying around on the kitchen counter, in the living room, wherever. Now it was always within reach. Always face down. She'd take it to the bathroom, to the laundry room, even to the backyard if she was just grabbing the mail. I caught her deleting texts once. She claimed she was just clearing storage. Another time, I saw her step out of the shower with her phone still in her hand, screen lit up. A message preview had flashed across it, a name I hadn't seen before. Oliver. Back then, I didn't think much of it. She worked with a lot of freelancers. Designers, photographers, tech people. Probably just someone from the agency, I told myself. But that name started to echo in my head. Oliver. He didn't sound like a client or a coworker. He sounded like a loose thread, one that I couldn't stop pulling. And the more I pulled, the more things unraveled. I remembered how she started getting defensive if I asked who she was texting or why she was late. She'd laugh it off at first, but if I pushed even slightly, she'd get cold. "Do you not trust me?" she once asked, eyes narrowed. I told her I did. I wanted to. But something in her tone made it feel like a warning, not a question. The kids noticed, too. Ava, who was sharp for a 12-year-old, said one day, "Mom's been really distracted lately." When I asked what she meant, she just shrugged. "I don't know." She's like, "Not really here." Like when I talk to her, it takes her forever to answer. Nolan was more blunt. He came into the bakery one afternoon after school and said, "Why is Mom always weird now?" I didn't have an answer. And then there was the party, the one hosted by her agency last month. It was supposed to be a celebration for landing a big contract. I went to support her like I always did. We were mingling with her colleagues when she introduced me to a few new hires. That's when she said it right in front of them, half laughing. "This is my husband, Grant. He's the genius behind our budget-friendly baked goods. Basically just a baker with solid bookkeeping *LLS. Everyone laughed. I chuckled too, but my face flushed. Her words lingered, more bitter than sweet. It wasn't the first time she downplayed me. But it felt different this time, colder, deliberate. Like she was drawing a line between her world and mine. I hadn't said anything that night. I just smiled and sipped my drink. But now, as I sat in our kitchen replaying the last few months, that moment hit harder than it should have. That wasn't a joke. That was who she'd become. Someone who looked at me and didn't see a partner anymore. Someone who saw something smaller, someone less. And I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know when I went from being her best friend, her safe place, her partner in building this life, to being a prop in the background of whatever show she was starring in now. I picked up my phone and opened our shared calendar. She had a trip to Sacramento scheduled in 2 days, a marketing conference she'd been excited about. I stared at the entry for a long time. I could feel something in my chest, not rage, not sadness exactly. It was more like confirmation. Like something inside me had finally snapped into place. She was slipping away from me. No, she had already slipped. And for the first time, I let myself admit it. I didn't think this was just about stress, or work, or burnout. Something else was going on. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. The thing about the truth is it doesn't whisper. Once it starts talking, it shouts. By Monday, I wasn't just suspicious. I was watching. Casey said she was flying to Sacramento for a marketing conference. She booked her flights through our joint card and even forwarded me the hotel reservation. Everything looked official. Too official. That morning, I dropped Ava and Nolan at school, then headed to my Redmond Bakery location to check in with the team. A few new baristas were starting that day and I wanted to be there for the morning rush. It should have been a normal day, but fate has a cruel sense of timing. Around 11 a.m., I stepped out to deliver a box of pastries to a nearby design firm that placed a large weekly order. It was something I usually delegated, but I needed the distraction. As I drove down the main avenue, I noticed a familiar SUV parked across the street from a high-rise apartment complex, dark gray with a dent near the bumper. Casey's car. I slowed down, heart thumping. She was supposed to be in Sacramento by now. At first, I told myself I must be mistaken. But as I passed the entrance, I saw her. Through the glass doors, in the lobby, standing just 10 feet from the concierge desk. She wasn't alone. She was standing with a man, tall, dark-haired, in a fitted suit. He leaned in close, smiling as she laughed softly. And then it happened. She kissed him. Not a cheek kiss. Not the kind you give a colleague or friend. This was slow. Familiar. An asterisk mate. Time stopped. I didn't fumble for my phone. I reached for it like I'd rehearsed it. I snapped 2, maybe 3 photos. I don't remember. My hands were shaking, but I got them. Casey. In the middle of a weekday. With Oliver. I didn't confront her. I didn't pull over or storm in or shout her name through the glass. I just drove. Quietly. Numbly. Like the air around me had frozen. I went back to the bakery. I told Marlene, our floor manager, that I had a headache and needed to lie down. She looked concerned, but I waved her off and climbed the stairs to the loft apartment above the shop. I'd renovated it a year ago as a temporary crash space for overnight prep or emergency stays. That day, it became something else. Sanctuary. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. The photos were there. Blurry but clear enough. Her hand on his chest. His arm around her waist. Their lips meeting like no one was watching. I waited. That night, Casey texted me, flight got delayed. I'll be out of touch until tomorrow. Love you. A lie. Smooth and easy. I didn't respond. I didn't sleep. The next morning, she called. I let it ring. She texted, hey babe, I'm checking in now. Long day ahead. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. When she finally returned home 3 days later, rolling in her suitcase and wearing that same fitted blazer she always wore when trying to look boardroom chic, I played along. I greeted her at the door, helped carry her bag upstairs, asked how the conference was. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, chatting about hotel food and panel fatigue. I nodded and smiled. Played my role. She didn't know the performance was over. I had seen the truth. There was no talking my way back from it. That weekend, I took the kids to visit my sister in Bellevue. Casey said she had to catch up on campaign reports. I didn't argue. On Sunday night, after the kids went to bed, I sat outside on my sister's patio and stared at the city lights. My sister brought me a beer and sat down beside me without asking questions. You okay? She finally asked. I shook my head. Not even close. That Monday morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Linda Reyes. Calm, precise, with the kind of voice that made you feel like the world wasn't ending even when it was. I didn't tell her the full story at first, just enough. I showed her the photos. I explained what I'd seen. Linda nodded slowly like she'd heard this story before. In Washington, she said, infidelity isn't grounds for divorce. A financial misconduct tied to an affair? That's a different story. Like what? Joint funds used for apartment rentals. Hotel stays. Gifts. If we can track those and document a pattern, we can file accordingly. I leaned forward. How do we start? Quietly, she said. Over the next few weeks, I gathered everything. Bank statements, her business travel receipts, charges that didn't add up, a Venmo transfer to someone named OW for reimbursement lunch, her email confirmation for a spa day in Bellevue that coincided with a charge from a florist on the same block. I checked the lease agreements. Casey had signed a short-term rental contract in her name for a unit in the same luxury building I saw her in, with our joint account paying the deposit. Every new piece felt like a new betrayal. Not just of our marriage, but of our life. Our family. Our children. Still, I said nothing. I continued being the dutiful husband. I packed school lunches. I baked cinnamon rolls on Saturdays. I kissed her cheek when she walked in late and nodded politely when she said she had one more team dinner. But something in her had started to shift. She grew anxious. More guarded. Her texts became more careful. Her smiles more forced. One night she asked, "Are you mad at me?" I looked up from the TV and shrugged. No. Just tired. She stared at me like she didn't believe me. And maybe she didn't. Maybe something in her finally sensed the end. But by then it didn't matter. Because everything had already collapsed. I was just sweeping up the pieces now. The first thing I did was move out quietly, strategically. Not a dramatic departure, no shouting match or slammed doors. I simply told Casey I needed more space to focus on a new project. I said the upstairs loft above the Redmond Bakery would give me peace, a place to focus on product development without the chaos of home. She didn't fight it. In fact, she seemed relieved. That was its own kind of heartbreak. I told the kids a half-truth. It's just for a while, I said, ruffling Nolan's hair. Sometimes grown-ups need extra workspace. You'll still see me every day. And they did. I picked them up from school, helped with homework, made breakfast on weekends. But I slept elsewhere. Every night, after brushing flour from my sleeves and locking the back door of the bakery, I climbed the stairs to that small, quiet apartment and got to work, not baking, but building a case. My lawyer, Linda, had given me a checklist. Evidence was everything. Step 1. Track financial discrepancies. I combed through 6 months of joint statements. Rent payments to the apartment building in Bellevue. Uber receipts that didn't line up with her late-night brainstorming sessions. Boutique purchases I didn't recognize. Hotel bookings. Spa visits. Dinner tabs from upscale restaurants I'd never stepped foot in. Casey had labeled them as client outings, but the receipts always came in pairs: 2 entrees, 2 drinks, and often a shared dessert. I made copies of everything. Labeled them. Filed them. Step 2. Document the affair. That meant more than just blurry photos in a lobby. Linda suggested a private investigator, but I wasn't comfortable with that. Too invasive, too close to stalking. Instead, I started saving her texts. Not the obvious ones, she never left trails that blatant, but the suspicious patterns. Texts she deleted. Calls taken in the bathroom. I downloaded an app that backed up device metadata. Times, locations. A breadcrumb trail. Nothing illegal. Just smart. Step 3. Clarify custody. This was the hardest. I didn't want to tear our kids from their mother. Despite everything, she was still their mom. But Linda made it clear, if Casey was misusing funds and lying consistently, I could make a case for primary custody. Not to punish her. To protect them. She walked me through the state laws. Washington considers stability paramount, she said. If you can show consistent parenting, financial transparency, and a clear home environment, the court will lean in your favor. So I started journaling. Daily entries. When I picked up the kids. What we talked about. What they noticed. What they said. Ava, one night, asked me, "Why don't you and Mom eat dinner together anymore?" I told her the truth, but softly. Grown-ups sometimes need time to figure things out. She nodded, too wise for 12. Mom's been acting different. Different how? She shrugged. She doesn't listen like she used to. Nolan was more blunt as always. She forgot to pick me up on Tuesday. Miss Decker had to call her. She said she got the days mixed up, but it was Tuesday. I noted that. I also started gathering character references. Teachers, neighbors, even our pediatrician who'd known us since Ava was born. Not to paint Casey as a villain, just to show that I was steady. Involved. Accountable. By week 3, the apartment above the bakery looked less like a loft and more like a war room. Folders, highlighters, a wall calendar with her travel dates cross-checked against charges. I wasn't proud of it. But I knew I had to be thorough. Emotion wouldn't win this battle. Facts would. Meanwhile, Casey was unraveling in slow motion. She called more often. Left me voicemails. Just checking in. Miss your face. She sent selfies from her desk, smiling too hard. One afternoon, she showed up at the bakery with lunch, something she hadn't done in over a year. My staff noticed. Whoa, boss, Marlene whispered, trouble in paradise? I laughed it off. Just a midweek surprise. But the surprise was on her. I wasn't falling for it. She started asking pointed questions. Do you think we're okay? Is this space helping? Are you seeing anyone? I answered honestly, if vaguely. I'm focused on work right now. What I didn't say was, I'm preparing to leave you. Still, part of me hoped she'd come clean. I watched her closely, looking for signs of remorse. Guilt? Anything real. But it was all surface. She never mentioned Oliver. Never admitted the lie. Just played house when the kids were around and vanished into her phone the moment they weren't. Then came the tipping point. One evening, Nolan had a fever. I called Casey to let her know. She didn't answer. An hour passed. 2. Finally, she called back, breathless, saying she had been in a meeting and had left her phone on silent. Her voice sounded distant, rushed. I heard music in the background. A man's laugh. I didn't ask. I just hung up and wrote it down. That same night, Linda emailed me a preliminary draft of the divorce papers. Review carefully, she wrote. Given the financial evidence and her history, we're in a strong position to request the house, primary custody, and a favorable split of assets. I stared at the file on my laptop. My name. Her name. Our lives reduced to columns and bullet points. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I wanted out. Out of the deception. Out of the performance. Out of the loop I'd been stuck in for months. So I drafted my own document. Not legal, personal. A letter. A simple explanation for the kids to be read when they were older. Not now. Not while everything still hurt. But one day when they asked what happened, I wanted them to have the truth, not the gossip, not the court's version, not Casey's story. My version. The real one. By the end of October, I could tell Casey knew something was wrong, she just couldn't figure out what. I hadn't accused her. I hadn't confronted her. But something in my silence was different. And people notice when you stop playing along. The calls and texts from her became more frequent, more desperate. Can we have dinner, just us? Are you avoiding me? Did I do something wrong? I answered vaguely, politely. She stopped calling me babe. She started asking, Grant, what's going on? The distance unnerved her. And I think she knew, deep down, that the foundation was cracking. But she did what Casey always did when she felt out of control. She tried to perform her way through it. It started with a sudden invitation. I'd love for you to come to the agency's quarterly pitch night, she said over the phone, a little too brightly. It's a big one. We're presenting to 2 potential investors. It would mean a lot to have you there. I almost declined. But then I realized something. She was inviting me back into her world. Not because she missed me, but because she was trying to shape the narrative. I said I'd go. That night, I wore my best pressed shirt and showed up 5 minutes early. Her coworkers greeted me with smiles, firm handshakes. Glad to see you again, Grant. It had been a while since I'd walked those halls. A few months ago, Casey used to introduce me with pride. My husband, he's a genius with yeast and numbers. But that evening? Something had shifted. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, stiff and rehearsed, like she wasn't sure how affectionate she was allowed to be. Glad you came, she said. You look great. You too, I replied, though I didn't mean it. She looked tired. Her makeup was heavier than usual. Her dress sharp but strained at the shoulders. There was a slight tremble in her hand when she handed me the program. The presentations began, and Casey's team was third on the list. When she took the stage, she was all smiles. Confident. Eloquent. A seasoned strategist. For 10 minutes, she wowed the room with polished slides, clever campaign projections, and client retention data. Then came the closing. And I'd like to thank my husband, Grant, who's here tonight, she said, gesturing toward me. Running a business isn't easy. And though he's just a baker, she laughed lightly, pausing for effect. His basic bookkeeping SK*LS have saved us from more than one burnt crust. The room chuckled. I smiled. But inside I froze. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them. Dismissive. As if I were a quirky footnote in her much larger, more important story. She didn't know what I knew. She didn't know I had the receipts, the *TS, the lease agreement. And yet, she still stood in front of her colleagues and downplayed me. Again, after her pitch, she came to sit beside me, flushed with adrenaline. Not bad, huh? She whispered. Not bad, I said, keeping my tone neutral. You really know how to control a room. She smiled, pleased. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I'd already spoken to someone on the board earlier that week. A friend of a friend, someone who had reached out to me discreetly. Off the record, he'd said over coffee. We've been having issues with Casey's budget reports, inconsistencies, questionable reimbursements. Nothing we've acted on yet. I said nothing, just listened. She's talented, he continued. But if we find proof she's misusing funds, especially for personal reasons, it's grounds for termination. I hadn't supplied anything. Not yet. But I left that meeting knowing the agency had already started watching her. I didn't need to act. The storm was already brewing. 3 days after pitch night, it happened. Casey called me in tears. Not the manipulative kind, real ones. I could tell by the cracks in her voice. They let me go, she choked out. They said I violated company policy. Something about financial ethics. I don't understand. I've been with them for 7 years. 7. I listened quietly. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was unraveling. They said there was a conflict of interest with Oliver, she whispered. That we'd misrepresented travel expenses. That I'd used the company card for personal stuff. But it was never like that. I swear it wasn't. I didn't respond. Grant, she said, voice trembling. Did you tell them something? I paused. No, I said honestly. I didn't have to. She sobbed quietly. That night, Ava asked me why Mom had been crying in the backyard. I told her gently, she's having a tough week at work, but we'll be okay. And we were. Because 2 days later, I received a formal offer. Consulting work with her former agency. Budget restructuring. Short-term contract. We've seen what you've done with your bakeries, the director said. We need that kind of clarity right now. When I walked into the office for the first onboarding meeting, Casey's nameplate had already been removed from the glass wall near the lobby. Oliver's, too. The whispers were everywhere. Apparently, he was married as well. His wife had filed for divorce after discovering their affair through a shared cloud account. Suddenly, Casey and Oliver weren't power players. They were collateral. I didn't revel in it, but I didn't feel sorry either. When I returned to my bakery later that afternoon, the scent of rising bread hit me like a bomb. Familiar, honest, pure. Marlene met me at the door, apron dusted in flour. How'd it go? She asked. Better than expected, I said, smiling. She grinned. You're not just a baker anymore, boss. No, I said quietly. I guess I'm not. The papers were served 2 weeks after Casey lost her job. I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it because it was time. There was nothing left to salvage. She didn't fight it at first. Maybe because she was too stunned, or maybe because she knew deep down that the affair had finally caught up to her. When she eventually responded, her tone changed. No more defensive laughter, no more excuses. Just pleading. She wanted mediation. A delay. Anything to keep the inevitable from happening too fast. But my lawyer had everything lined up. Financial misuse, documented infidelity, and clear evidence of joint funds being used to support her second life. In Washington state, that mattered. I retained the house, full custody of the kids, and the majority of our joint assets. Casey tried to argue for shared custody, but the court sided with consistency. I'd been the one attending parent-teacher conferences, coaching Nolan's soccer team, and helping Ava with her college prep. Her new part-time freelance work wasn't enough to sway the judge. Oliver didn't fare much better. His wife filed as well. From what I heard, he moved into a short-term rental and lost most of his major accounts. Casey ended up crashing with her younger sister in Tacoma. They used to barely get along. Now they shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment while Casey scrambled to rebuild her career one birthday banner at a time. The kids didn't say much at first, but their silence spoke volumes. Ava stopped replying to her mom's texts. Nolan would visit twice a month, mostly out of obligation, but each time he came back quieter than when he left. Casey didn't push it. Maybe she finally understood that love, once betrayed, doesn't come back on command. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness. Like standing at the shoreline after a storm, knowing the worst had passed but not yet believing the sun was rising again. 6 months later, my life looked different. Not better in the flashy success story way. Just calmer. Steady. The bakery chain was growing steadily, not explosively. I'd opened a new location in Ballard, hired pastry chefs who had lost jobs when smaller cafes folded. I started mentoring students from the culinary program at Seattle Central. It gave me something to focus on beyond just dough and deadlines. Ava joined her school's journalism club. She wrote an editorial piece about resilience that made the district newsletter. I didn't cry reading it, but only because I couldn't. The pride was too big for tears. Nolan started shadowing our sandwich team on weekends. He wanted to create a grilled cheese series called Melt Masters. He had logo sketches, menu ideas, even a slogan, "We don't just toast. We triumph." The house began to feel warm again. Not just in the literal sense, though I did finally fix the draft in the hallway, but emotionally. The laughter returned. The casual, "How was your day?" at the dinner table started to mean something again. One evening, after a PTA meeting, I ran into Mary, a widow, soft-spoken and warm. She volunteered at the school library and always wore cardigans with silly book quotes. We chatted in the parking lot. Then again over coffee. Then again, walking around Green Lake. There was no pressure. Just presence. Something real. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't watching my words or guarding my heart. I was just living. And it was enough. Casey called me once in December. Just to hear my voice. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't hate her. I just didn't owe her anything more. And maybe, in a strange way, she'd given me a gift. Not freedom in the dramatic, escape the marriage sense. But the quieter kind, the kind where you get to build a life where peace isn't conditional. Where love, when it returns, doesn't come with fine print. I didn't know where the road would go from here. But I was finally walking it, eyes open, feet steady, one honest step at a time.